Europe, second half of 1945. The war is over. Or is it? It's the early hours of the morning, and a group of prisoners of war are awoken by searchlights blazing through the windows of their barrack blocks. The stillness of the night is broken by armed men barging their way inside. In minutes, they begin frog-marching the prisoners outside. The soldiers beat those who resist with the butts of their rifles. Fearing death, the inmates plead for mercy from their captors, but to no avail. They are loaded on to waiting lorries and driven off into the night. For some of them, this is the last journey they will ever take. This may sound like something out of a Nazi camp or a Soviet gulag, but the men responsible for this are American soldiers. This is a World War II in real-time legacy documentary, a series of World War II. I'm Spartacus Olsson. Scenes like what I just described will play out in Germany, Austria, northern Italy, and beyond from the end of World War II in May 1945 to 1947. So who are these people, and why are American soldiers treating them like human cattle? Well, the prisoners in this specific example are men of Andrei Vlasov's Russian Liberation Army, the ROA, who fought with the Germans up until 1945. Knowing that they faced the death penalty as traitors to the Soviet Union, they switched side in early May 1945 and then attempted to surrender to the Americans, hoping to receive sanctuary as anti-communist fighters. That will turn out to be a pipe dream for them and many others. At the time of the German surrender, beyond millions of active Red Army servicemen and women, there are more than 6 million Soviet citizens caught in Germany and Austria. Broadly speaking, the majority of these people fall into 3 categories. 1. Ostarbeiter, up to 4 million civilian workers laboring in Germany under varying degrees of coercion. 2. German-held Soviet prisoners of war. That is roughly 2 million Red Army soldiers who have survived the terrible conditions of the German POW camps. 3. Western Allied held prisoners of war of Soviet citizenry. This is by far the smallest group, numbering in the low hundreds of thousands. They have served in German uniform, whether in the ROA as Osttruppen in the Wehrmacht or as foreign fighters of the Waffen-SS. Stalin regards almost all 3 categories with, at the very least, suspicion and, at most, outright hostility. Those who collaborated with the Germans are traitors to the motherland. The prisoners of war are cowards and shirkers who should have done the honorable thing and fought to the death. Along with the foreign workers, they have also been infected with the viruses of fascism and capitalism, making them potential spies, subversives, or counter-revolutionaries. Despite knowing of the scale of the problem, Stalin has been unwilling to raise the issue with the Western Allies until very late in the war, to admit that there were entire divisions of Soviet citizens fighting for the Germans would shatter the propaganda myth of the unity of the Soviet motherland. During the planning for D-Day, Schaeff asked the Soviets what they should do with all the Osttruppen they anticipated capturing in Normandy. In response, the Soviets simply denied that any of their people had gone over to the enemy. The absurdity of those denials became obvious as the Allies drove through France and into Belgium, capturing almost 30,000 Soviet nationals wearing German Feldgrau. Almost all Osttruppen captured in Normandy were transferred back to POW camps in Britain, and it is the British who set the precedent for forced repatriation, sending prisoners to the Soviet port of Murmansk as early as October 1944. Then followed months of inconclusive diplomatic back and forth until military representatives of the Big Three finally sat down to discuss the issue at the Yalta Conference in February 1945. By this point, the Soviets have liberated some 50 to 60,000 Western prisoners from POW camps in Eastern Germany, Poland, Hungary, Romania, and the Balkans. The Soviets had been uncooperative with the Western Allies on this issue, with most liberated men simply left to fend for themselves, like making their way to the port of Odessa to be reunited with their own forces from there. So Stalin holds a strong negotiating hand at Yalta, This is how Mark Elliott puts it in The United States and Forced Repatriation of Soviet Citizens, 1944-47. London and Washington reminded its negotiators that the longer the delay in reaching an agreement, the more servicemen there would be fending for themselves in Eastern Europe. Russia's initial apathy about POW negotiations and its guilty till proven innocent attitude towards all soldiers taken alive by the enemy heightened the concern of Western diplomats. Soviet negotiators, in comparison, were not handicapped by humanitarian considerations, which would have necessitated compromise. The West's humanitarian concerns appears, in retrospect, to have been restricted to Westerners. Britain-American concerns for their liberated servicemen appears to have been the overriding motif behind the West signing the repatriation agreement. In the end, it is agreed that all Western and Soviet citizens who come under the control of the other side shall be repatriated without delay. The exact wording of the clause is quite ambiguous, although the blanket statement that all prisoners will be handed over leaves the door open to the use of force. There is debate about this on the American side. U.S. Secretary of State Edward Stettinius is advised by his Undersecretary Joseph Grew to oppose any agreement forwarded by his military colleagues that could require the use of force. But Stettinius is either unable or unwilling to influence the final agreement. In response to one of Grew's cables, he confirms that the agreement will set aside the rights of prisoners of war as protected by the Geneva Convention. But how will this work in practice? How do you repatriate 6 million people without delay? One of the first significant events is in Austria in early May 1945, when the U.S. Army begins delivering the first men of the ROA to the Soviets. As we saw in our chronological coverage, Andrei Vlasov is making covert approaches to the Western Allies in the hopes of avoiding capture by the Soviet Union. Squeezed between the U.S. forces in the west and the Soviet forces in the east, Vlasov and the commander of his 1st Division, Sergei Bunyashenko, decided to switch sides and intervene in the Prague uprising on the side of the Czech resistance. On May 6, ROA vehicles emblazoned with the words "Death to Hitler, Death to Stalin" helped to prevent the destruction of the city by the Waffen-SS. Then Vlasov's army fights a desperate retreat towards American lines. On May 9th, Vlasov and his officers set off to surrender to George Patton's Third Army at Pilsen and offer themselves as an anti-communist force. Although the Americans are willing to extract Vlasov himself, they stop short of guaranteeing any protection for his men. While some American officers do allow small groups of ROA soldiers to break through Western lines to safety, the vast majority of the 1st and 2nd Divisions are left behind to the mercies of the Soviets. Some 10,000 men are captured and sent to the Soviet Union, with some being shot on the spot. Smaller numbers are held by the Americans and handed over in the months to come. The Americans make no resistance when Soviet troops take custody of Vlasov and the other generals like Shilenkov, Malishkin, Bunyashenko, and Maltsev. They will be transferred to the Soviet Union and hanged in August 1946. Soon after the events in Austria, it's the turn of the British to hand over an entire unit to the Soviets. It's the 15th SS Cossack Cavalry Corps commanded by Helmut von Panwitz. Panwitz is a Generalleutnant of the Wehrmacht, an SS Gruppenführer, and a Feldataman, or Supreme Commander of the Cossacks. The Corps began life as part of the German Army, which recruited Cossack cavalrymen from a semi-autonomous Cossack district in the occupied Kuban in 1942. Many of the senior Cossack officers are Russian emigres who fought on the side of the Whites in the Civil War and then went into exile in the 1920s. After fighting the partisans in Yugoslavia in 1943, in the summer of 1944, some Cossack units were sent to northern Italy to fight the partisans there. With German blessing, the Cossacks and their families set up something of a proto-state in the Tolmezzo region of Italy, complete with Cossack newspapers, Cossack street names, and cultural traditions. By the time of the German surrender, the Cossacks have retreated north into Austria, hoping to surrender to the British and offer their services to the West. Panwitz holds one final parade and then orders his men to lay down their arms. Over the next few days, they march into captivity under British escort. Soon, the British are holding somewhere in the region of 45 to 50,000 Cossacks, their families, and their German officers in camps and towns in southern Austria. The majority of them are in the Drau Valley between Linz and Oberdrauburg, with Panwitz and his staff being held in an area around Althofen. After giving the Cossacks vague assurances of their safety, the camp commanders receive orders on May 26 to begin the deportations from General Charles Keitel. It is of the utmost importance that all the officers, and particularly senior commanders, are rounded up and that none are allowed to escape. The Soviet forces consider this as being of the highest importance and will probably regard the safe delivery of the officers as a test of British good faith. For the British officers and men running the camps, this is a blow. By now, they've come to sympathize with the Cossacks' staunch anti-communism. One commander, Major Rusty Davis, will later recall. I was shattered. It was a denial of everything we had ever said to the Cossacks. I couldn't believe it. Davis asks to be relieved of his duties, but is ordered to stay on. The very fact that he has built a rapport with the Cossack officers means that he is key to a successful deportation. Dutifully, albeit with distaste, the British soldiers and officers start their deportations swiftly. First, some 1,500 Cossack officers are lured to a conference at Judenburg. There, they are informed by a British brigadier that they are to be immediately handed over to the Soviets. Then, over the next few days, across southern Austria, the Cossacks are dragged onto lorries and trains to be transported towards the Soviet lines. The Brits are surprised by the virulent resistance of the Cossack soldiers and civilians, and in a cruel twist of fate, the reluctant British troops now have to use a great deal of force to finish the job. Commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, David Shaw, will later recall. It was terrible. I remember these women, some of them pregnant, lying on the ground, rolling and screaming. My men were putting their rifles on the ground and lifting the women into the train, then locking the doors and standing there as the train pulled out with women screaming out of the windows. It gave us all a great shock. It was a frightful order to give, and there was a lot of feeling among my troops. On June 1st, at Linz, Major Davis's troops fix bayonets and advance on Cossacks gathered for mass. The crowd includes some 4,000 women and 2,500 children. In the ensuing frenzy, a few hundred manage to run free, while others are let go by sympathetic soldiers. Some choose suicide, hurling themselves from a nearby bridge into the river Drava. Mothers drown their children and then themselves. Men beg to be shot. All day long, Cossacks are herded into lorries and driven to the nearby railway. In one day alone, the British managed to deport some 6,000 people. Although the British do start allowing those who left the Soviet Union before 1939 to remain, by June 4th, at least 30,000 Cossacks have been delivered to the Soviets. The German commander, Panwitz, refuses to leave his men behind and goes into captivity with them. Along with his Cossack generals, he will be executed in Moscow in 1947. This whole process of deportations will become known as Operation Keelhaul and will continue from Germany, Austria, and northern Italy into late 1947. And as I have already covered in a previous episode, Axis troops of Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, Montenegrin, and Slovenian background are all handed over to Josip Tito's Yugoslav forces, with tens of thousands of them executed. One group that has a narrow escape are the men of the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, the Galician Division, who are imprisoned in Rimini in Italy. Although most of these men identify as Ukrainian, many were actually citizens of pre-war Poland, from the eastern areas now annexed by the Soviet Union. Under pressure from Władysław Andas and the Vatican, the British agreed to withhold their deportation. Most will later immigrate to Britain and Canada. But the military men and their families we've spoken about so far are a very small minority. The vast majority of deportees are Soviet POWs and Ostarbeiter. By midsummer of 1945, there are perhaps 3 million of these people left in the areas occupied by the Western Allies. Here they are under the authority of the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, or UNRRA, which houses displaced persons, DPs, in camps segregated by nationality. Between them, SHAEF and the Soviet administration of the Plenipotentiary of Repatriation Affairs arranged for groups of DPs to be transported by rail to occupied Poland or to the Soviet Union. On some days, over 100,000 people are sent eastward. The Soviets produce pamphlets and newspapers, make speeches, and produce films to encourage Eastern Europeans to return to the Soviet fold. If the promise of supposed better living conditions doesn't work, there are always agents of the NKVD and SMERSH to apply threats and intimidation. For the most part, though, the majority of these Ostarbeiter and prisoners of war return without being physically forced. Some truly hope that life will be better at home, and whatever fears they might have, most of them haven't betrayed the Soviet Union by wearing enemy colors. On arrival, all Soviet citizens are interrogated, verified, and registered by SMERSH counter-espionage and the military police under the NKVD. The same goes for anyone that has lived in the USSR under German occupation. At filtration camps, they must recount their story through invasion and occupation, their deportation or travel to Germany, life and work in Germany or the occupied Soviet Union, contact with German intelligence and police services, and knowledge of collaborators. They are photographed and fingerprinted. They are also treated for infectious diseases, including typhus and tuberculosis. Many of the female returnees are suffering from venereal disease, in some cases after being raped by their Red Army liberators. During their stays, which can be as long as 2 months, some returnees are pressed into service as unpaid labor for local industry while they are being re-educated. By October 1945, interned repatriates had listened to 78,000 lectures and held 360,000 group discussions. Every day, 215,000 copies of central newspapers were circulated. The Soviet Repatriation Administration, in 1 year, had itself published and distributed 600,000 pamphlets, 90,000 posters, and 3 million flyers. Some camps produced their own news sheets with titles designed to evoke longing to return, such as "The Motherland Awaits You, Comrades." Some of the holding stations and camps also had schools for child repatriates. Those who pass filtration are given travel documents allowing them to return home. There they must register with a second district-level filtration system, which double-checks them before they are issued residence permits. Those who fail to show up in their home district within a month are placed on a national register of wanted persons. Those who fail the second filtration are handed over to the NKVD for further investigation. The second check also serves as another opportunity for returnees to give over any information about collaborators. During the time between the two checks, they learn that the state expects them to make a trade, give the security services some information, and in return you'll be left alone to live a normal life. Beyond catching collaborators and subversives, the filtration camps are meant to symbolically verify returnees as loyal citizens of the motherland. But in practice, returnees face significant social stigma. At its most basic, this includes things like women being called German whores. For some 60,000 Communist Party members who had remained in occupied territories, it means being booted from the party by 1947. One district official declares, "We are not allowing them to conduct counter-revolution. We are going to mobilize them and send them off to float timber down the rivers." Things are even worse for the roughly 350,000 who are filtered out. They are arrested and many of them sent to labor camps or into exile in Siberia or Central Asia, where many will die. A total of 94,000 people are charged with collaboration or war crimes, and the Soviet authorities will continue to use evidence from the filtration camps to go after accused collaborators into the 1980s. So, It's no surprise that back in Germany and Austria, resistance grows to deportations from those remaining in the DP camps. Some Soviet citizens refuse to register as displaced persons. Others destroy their identification papers or provide false details. Those already living in the DP camps petition UNRRA, the US State Department, and the United Nations for special status on basis of the cruelty of the Soviet regime. Here they are assisted by émigré groups in Britain, the United States, and Canada. They cite the atrocities carried out by Moscow, restrictions on the practicing of religion, including the destruction of churches, mass starvation during forced collectivization, murder during Stalin's purges of the 1930s, and the long prison sentences handed out to those who had collaborated with the Germans. Others take advantage of the same legal exceptions as the Galician division. According to the UNRRA, the number of Ukrainians claiming Polish citizenship jumps from 9,200 in December 45 to 107,000 in June 1947. Some take more drastic measures. In February 1946, the New York Times reports on a repatriation operation which took place at the former Nazi camp of Dachau, now repurposed as a displaced persons camp. Once the Russian Ostarbeiter know that they are set to be deported, several try to kill themselves. The GIs quickly cut down those who hanged themselves from rafters. Those who were still conscious were screaming in Russian, pointing first at the guns of the guards and then at themselves, begging to be shot. Resistance is so heavy that the U.S. Army soldiers have to deploy tear gas. The final toll is 10 dead and 21 wounded. By September 1945, about 2 million people have been sent eastward by the Western Allies. Another 3 million have returned on their own, and around 1 million remain in the western zones of Germany and Austria, refusing to go home. They live in a kind of legal limbo, with the Soviets demanding action from the West, and the West unsure what to do. In January and February 1946, the issue is discussed at the Third Committee of the United Nations Assembly in London. After a lot of argument between East and West, the committee gives refugee status to many of those refusing to go home, declaring no refugee or displaced persons who have finally and definitively, in complete freedom and after receiving full knowledge of the facts, including adequate information from their governments of their countries of origin, express valid objections to returning to their countries of origin, shall be compelled to return to their countries of origin. Although it does not say so in explicit terms, the committee has effectively decreed that opposition to the Soviet system of government is grounds for refugee status. This last million will go on to new lives in the US, Britain, Canada, Australia, and other nations. This is one of the first steps towards a legal and practical system to handle people fleeing conflict and oppression. International refugee status. In 2024, there are estimated 117.3 million displaced persons and refugees caught in this limbo, this non-existence. That is like the entire populations of Canada, Australia, Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, and Austria having to leave their countries. They are the victims of conflict, persecution, oppression, crime, geopolitical expediency, hatred born of petty fear for the unknown, and a lack of human compassion. Poet Brian Bilston has given the opposite side's voice in a single text. They have no need of our help, so do not tell me these haggard faces could belong to you or I, should life have dealt a different hand. We need to see them for who they really are, chancers and scroungers, layabouts and loungers with bombs up their sleeves, cutthroats and thieves. They are not welcome here. We should make them go back to where they came from. They cannot share our food, share our homes, share our countries. Instead, let us build a wall to keep them out. It is not okay to say, these are people just like us. A place should only belong to those who are born there. Do not be so stupid to think that the world can be looked at another way. Let me read that again. The world can be looked at another way. Do not be so stupid to think that a place should only belong to those who are born there. These are people just like us. It is not okay to say, build a wall to keep them out. Instead, let us share our countries, share our homes, share our food. They cannot go back to where they came from. We should make them welcome here. They are not cutthroats and thieves with bombs up their sleeves, layabouts and loungers, chancers and scroungers. We need to see them for who they really are. Should life have dealt a different hand, these haggard faces could belong to you or I. So do not tell me they have no need of our help. Never forget.